The morning sun painted the Texas sky in soft shades of orange and pink as Rebecca McKenna knelt in her family's vegetable garden. The cool dirt felt good under her hands as she carefully pulled weeds from around the tomato plants. At 19, she had the gentle grace of a young woman, but the calloused hands of someone who knew hard work. Her long brown hair was tied back with a simple ribbon, and her blue dress was already dusty from the morning's chores. The homestead sat in a small valley surrounded by rolling hills covered in tall grass. It was beautiful country, but it was also dangerous. Her father James and her two brothers had left before dawn to hunt deer in the woods about 5 miles away. They hoped to bring back enough meat to last through the coming winter months. Rebecca's mother, Anne, was inside the small log cabin preparing breakfast and humming an old hymn her own mother had taught her years ago. Everything seemed peaceful and normal. The chickens scratched around in their pen, and their old milk cow stood chewing grass in the pasture. Rebecca could hear her mother moving around inside, the wooden floors creaking under her feet. She smiled as she worked, thinking about how her father would be pleased with how well the vegetables were growing this year. But danger was already watching them from the hills. A group of Comanche warriors had been tracking the McKenna family for 2 days. They knew the men had gone hunting because they had seen them leave at first light. They knew the women were alone and vulnerable. The leader of the group was a fierce warrior named Thundercloud, who had painted his face with red and black stripes for battle. His men were young and eager to prove themselves, but they followed his orders without question. The attack came without warning. Rebecca was reaching for a particularly stubborn weed when she heard her mother scream from inside the cabin. The sound sent ice through her veins. She had never heard her mother make such a sound of pure terror. Rebecca dropped her tools and ran toward the house, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. As she reached the porch, the front door burst open. 3 Comanche warriors rushed out, their faces painted for war, their long black hair flowing behind them. One of them grabbed Rebecca's arm before she could even think to run. His grip was like iron, and she cried out in pain and fear. "Mama!" she screamed, trying to break free. "Mama, where are you?" She could hear sounds of struggle from inside the cabin, furniture being overturned, and her mother's voice calling her name. Rebecca fought against the warrior holding her, kicking and scratching, but he was too strong. More warriors appeared from around the cabin, and she realized they had surrounded the homestead completely. The warrior holding her said something, in his own language, to the others. His voice was deep and commanding. Another warrior brought rope from his horse, and they began tying her hands behind her back. The rough rope cut into her wrists, but that pain was nothing compared to the fear eating at her heart. "Please," she begged, even though she knew they probably couldn't understand her. "Please don't hurt my mother. She's done nothing wrong." The sounds from inside the cabin suddenly stopped. The terrible silence that followed was worse than the screaming had been. Rebecca's legs felt weak, and she would have fallen if the warrior hadn't been holding her up. Her mother's voice was gone, and Rebecca knew in her heart what that meant. 2 more warriors came out of the cabin, and one of them shook his head at Thundercloud. The leader's face grew hard, and he barked orders to his men. Rebecca didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. They were preparing to leave, and they were taking her with them. But first, they brought out a rough burlap sack. "No," Rebecca whispered, as she realized what they intended to do. "Please, no." The warrior holding her pulled the sack down over her head, and everything went dark. The burlap smelled of grain and dust, and it was hard to breathe through the thick material. She could hear the men moving around her, talking in their language, but she couldn't see anything. The darkness made her panic worse, and she started to hyperventilate. Strong hands lifted her onto a horse, and she felt herself being tied to the saddle. The horse shifted under her weight, and she grabbed onto the saddle horn to keep from falling. Her hands were still tied behind her back, making it almost impossible to balance. Through the burlap, she could hear other voices crying and begging. She realized she wasn't the only captive. The raiders had attacked other homesteads too, and there were other prisoners. The knowledge that she wasn't alone gave her a tiny bit of comfort, but not much. The horses began to move, and Rebecca swayed, dangerously in the saddle. She had ridden horses before, but never like this, never blind and tied up. Every step the horse took threatened to throw her off balance. The warrior riding behind her sometimes steadied her with his hand, but his touch made her skin crawl. As they rode away from her home, Rebecca tried to memorize the sounds and smells around her. She could hear a creek running somewhere to her left and the wind in the trees. She smelled wildflowers and sage. Maybe if she could remember these things, she could find her way home someday. But deep down, she knew she would probably never see her home again. The first day of riding was the longest of her life. The sun beat down on the dark burlap, making it hot and stuffy inside. Sweat ran down her face and her lips became dry and cracked. The horse's movement made her stomach sick, and she had to fight not to throw up inside the sack. When they finally stopped for the night, the warriors pulled her down from the horse but left the sack over her head. They tied her to a tree with the other captives. Rebecca could hear someone crying softly nearby, and she whispered into the darkness, "Hello, is someone there?" "Si, Nina," came a gentle voice speaking Spanish-accented English. "I am here. My name is Isabella. I am from the settlement near the river." Rebecca felt a wave of relief. Here was someone who could understand her, someone who was going through the same terrible experience. "I'm Rebecca," she whispered back. "What's going to happen to us?" Isabella was quiet for a moment. "I do not know, child, but we must be strong. We must survive whatever comes next." The old woman's voice was steady and calm, and it helped Rebecca feel a little less afraid. Throughout that long, cold night, Isabella whispered advice to her about how to stay alive, how to show strength even when you felt weak, and how to keep hope alive even in the darkest times. "Remember," Isabella said as the first light of dawn began to filter through Rebecca's burlap prison, "you are stronger than you know. Your spirit cannot be broken unless you let it be broken." As the warriors prepared to continue their journey, on the second day, Rebecca held on to those words. She would need every bit of strength she could find for what lay ahead. The sack over her head might hide her face from the world, but it couldn't hide her determination to survive. The horses began to move again, carrying her further away from everything she had ever known and toward a fate she couldn't even imagine. The third day of riding felt like it would never end. Rebecca's body ached from being tied to the horse for so long, and the burlap sack made every breath feel like work. The rough material had rubbed against her neck and face, leaving her skin raw and sore. But worse than the physical pain was not knowing where they were taking her, or what would happen when they got there. Through the fabric, she could smell wood smoke and hear many voices talking in different languages. The horses slowed down, and Rebecca's heart started beating faster. After 3 days of traveling, they had finally arrived somewhere important. The sounds around her grew louder and more complex. She could hear horses neighing, dogs barking, and what sounded like hundreds of people talking at once. There were voices speaking in the Comanche language she had heard from her captors, but also Spanish, English, and other languages she couldn't identify. The mixture of sounds created a busy, chaotic atmosphere that made her nervous. Someone untied her from the horse and helped her down to the ground. Her legs were so stiff and weak that she almost fell. Strong hands steadied her, but she still couldn't see anything through the sack. The ground under her feet felt different than the prairie grass they had been traveling over. It was harder, more packed down, like many people and animals had walked over it for a long time. "Isabella," she whispered, hoping her friend from the journey was still nearby. "I am here, Nina," came the familiar voice, though it sounded strained and tired. "We have arrived at some kind of gathering place. There are many people here." Rebecca could hear that Isabella was right. This wasn't just a Comanche camp. The voices around them belonged to people from many different tribes and backgrounds. She could hear English being spoken with different accents, Spanish conversations, and several Native American languages she couldn't understand. The smell of cooking food mixed with smoke from many fires, and she could hear the sounds of trading going on all around them. A hand grabbed Rebecca's arm and started leading her forward. She stumbled along, trying to keep her balance on the uneven ground. The person guiding her spoke in Comanche to someone else, and she heard laughter in response. The sound made her stomach turn with fear and embarrassment. They stopped walking, and Rebecca heard new voices around her. These men sounded different from her captors. They spoke English, but with rough, gravelly voices that suggested they were used to hard living. She realized these must be the white traders she had heard about, men who lived on the frontier and did business with various Indian tribes. "What you got there, Thundercloud?" one of the English-speaking men asked. His voice had a mean edge to it that made Rebecca's skin crawl. "Looks like you had yourself quite a successful raid." Thundercloud, the warrior who had led the attack on her home, responded in broken English. "Good captives, strong women, worth many horses." Rebecca felt sick hearing herself discussed like she was livestock at a market. She tried to stand up straighter to show some dignity, even though she couldn't see and was tied up like an animal. Isabella had told her to stay strong, and she was trying her best to follow that advice. "Let's see what we're dealing with here," another trader said. Rebecca heard footsteps coming closer, and then hands were touching her arms and shoulders, examining her like she was a horse they might buy. She jerked away from the touch, but the rope around her wrists made it impossible to really escape. "This one's got some fight in her," the man laughed. "That's good. The broken ones don't last long anyway." The negotiations went on for what felt like hours. Rebecca stood there in the darkness of the burlap sack, listening to men argue over her value compared to horses, weapons, and trade goods. Sometimes they spoke in English, sometimes in Spanish, and sometimes in Comanche. She couldn't understand most of what was being said, but the tone was always the same. They were discussing her future like she had no say in it at all. During the bargaining, she learned that there were several other captives being traded at the same time. She could hear other people being moved around, and occasionally someone would cry out in fear or pain. The sounds made her heart ache for all the families that had been torn apart by these raids. "Isabella," she whispered during a quiet moment. "Are you still there?" "Si, Nina. But I think they are separating us. Different people want different captives." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Isabella had been her only source of comfort during this nightmare, the only person who understood what she was going through. The thought of losing her felt almost as bad as losing her family. "Don't forget what I told you," Isabella whispered urgently. "Stay strong, survive. Find a way to keep your spirit alive no matter what happens." Before Rebecca could respond, she heard Isabella being led away. The old woman's voice grew fainter as she was taken in a different direction, and then Rebecca couldn't hear her at all anymore. She was alone again, surrounded by people but completely isolated. The negotiations for Rebecca seemed to go on longer than for the other captives. She heard Thundercloud talking with several different groups of people, each time asking for different combinations of horses, weapons, and other goods. It seemed like he thought she was particularly valuable for some reason, though she couldn't understand why. Finally, she heard a new voice join the conversation. This voice was different from the others. It spoke Comanche fluently, but there was something commanding about it that made the other voices quiet down. Even Thundercloud's tone became more respectful when speaking to this person. The new voice belonged to someone important, Rebecca could tell. When he spoke, others listened. The conversation between him and Thundercloud seemed more serious than the earlier negotiations, less like casual trading and more like an important business deal. "This one," the commanding voice said in English, and Rebecca realized he was talking about her. "She will come with me." Thundercloud seemed pleased with whatever offer had been made. Rebecca heard the sounds of goods being exchanged, horses being led around, and weapons being handed over. The deal was being completed, and she was the main item being traded. New hands took hold of her arms, gentler than Thundercloud's men had been, but still firm and controlling. She was being transferred to her new owner, whoever he was. The commanding voice spoke to her in English, his words clear and careful. "You will not be harmed if you do not try to escape," he said. "My people will treat you fairly, but you must follow our ways now." Rebecca wanted to speak, to ask questions, to beg for mercy, but her throat felt too tight to make any sounds. Everything was happening so fast, and she felt completely powerless to control any of it. As her new captors began to lead her away from the trading area, Rebecca heard the sounds of the gathering starting to break up. Different groups were heading in different directions, taking their new acquisitions with them. She wondered if she would ever see any of the other captives again, especially Isabella. The burlap sack still covered her head, keeping her in darkness. She had no idea what her new owner looked like or where he was taking her. All she knew was that her life had just changed again, and she had no choice but to go along with whatever fate awaited her. As they walked away from the trading post, Rebecca tried to memorize every sound and smell around her. Someday, if she ever got the chance to escape, she would need to remember this place and how to find it again. It might be her only link back to the world she had lost. Rebecca walked for what felt like miles, her feet stumbling over rocks and uneven ground. The burlap sack over her head made every step dangerous, and she had to trust the hands guiding her not to let her fall. Around her, she could hear the sounds of a large group moving together. Horses snorted and stamped, leather creaked, and many voices spoke in the Comanche language. Her new captors had not spoken to her again since leaving the trading post. The man with the commanding voice rode somewhere ahead of her, occasionally, giving orders to his warriors. Rebecca tried to understand what kind of person he was from the way others responded to him. Every time he spoke, the other voices became quiet and respectful. This was clearly someone very important among the Comanche people. The sun was getting lower in the sky when they finally stopped. Rebecca could feel the warmth on her shoulders changing as shadows grew longer. Her legs were shaking from exhaustion, and her throat was dry as dust. She hadn't had water since early morning, and the burlap sack made breathing difficult. Someone helped her sit down on what felt like soft grass. The sounds around her suggested they had arrived at a camp. She could hear children playing and laughing, women talking as they worked, and the normal sounds of daily life. It was strange to hear such ordinary, peaceful sounds after the tension and fear of the trading post. "Water," a woman's voice said in English, and Rebecca felt a clay cup being pressed into her tied hands. She drank gratefully, even though she had to be careful not to spill with her hands bound behind her back. The water was cool and sweet, the best thing she had tasted in days. The woman helped her drink more, and Rebecca felt a tiny bit of strength returning to her body. More people were gathering around them. Rebecca could hear footsteps on the grass, quiet conversations, and the rustle of clothing as people sat down. It felt like the entire camp was coming to see what their leader had brought back from the trading post. The man with the commanding voice spoke to the crowd in Comanche, explaining something about the trading and the captives he had acquired. Rebecca wished desperately that she could understand what he was saying. Was he telling them how to treat her? Was he explaining what work she would be expected to do? The not knowing was almost worse than anything else. "Standing Bear?" Someone called out, and Rebecca realized that must be her new owner's name, Standing Bear. Even in a foreign language, it sounded strong and important. Standing Bear spoke again to his people, his voice carrying easily across the camp. Rebecca could hear respect and even affection in the way people responded to him. Whatever kind of leader he was, his people seemed to genuinely care about him, not just fear him. Then she heard him walking toward her. His footsteps were different from the others, more confident and purposeful. He stopped right in front of where she sat, and she could sense him looking down at her even though she couldn't see him. "It is time," he said in English, his words clear and careful. Rebecca's heart started beating so fast she thought it might burst out of her chest. Time for what? What was about to happen to her? The crowd around them grew quiet, as if everyone was waiting for something important. Standing Bear spoke to one of his warriors, giving instructions in Comanche. Rebecca heard someone moving behind her, and then hands began working at the knots that held the burlap sack in place. After 3 days of darkness, she was finally going to see light again. The sack was lifted slowly from her head, and Rebecca squeezed her eyes shut as brightness hit her face. Even though the sun was setting, the light felt overwhelming after so much time in darkness. She blinked rapidly, trying to adjust, her eyes watering from the sudden change. As her vision cleared, the first thing she saw was a circle of Comanche people sitting around her. Men, women, and children all watched her with curious eyes. Some looked stern, others seemed sympathetic, but all of them were clearly waiting to see what would happen next. Then she looked up and saw Standing Bear for the first time. He was a tall, strong man, probably in his early 30s, with long black hair decorated with feathers and beads. His face was painted with simple lines of red and yellow, and he wore clothes made of beautifully decorated leather. Everything about him suggested power and leadership, but it was his eyes that caught Rebecca's attention. Those eyes were staring at her with an expression she couldn't understand. He looked shocked, like he had seen something impossible. His face went pale under the paint, and his mouth opened slightly as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find words. Standing Bear took a step backward, then another. His eyes never left Rebecca's face, but now they were filled with something that looked almost like fear. The confident leader who had commanded respect from everyone around him suddenly seemed shaken and uncertain. The crowd began to murmur among themselves, clearly puzzled by their leader's strange reaction. Some of the warriors started to look concerned, as if they thought something might be wrong with Standing Bear. "Great Spirit," Standing Bear whispered in English, his voice barely audible. Then, to everyone's amazement, this powerful war chief's legs seemed to give out from under him. He dropped to his knees in the grass, still staring at Rebecca with those wide, shocked eyes. His hands trembled as he reached toward her face, then stopped without touching her. The entire camp fell silent. Children stopped playing, women stopped their work, and even the dogs seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening. No one had ever seen their leader act this way before. Standing Bear spoke in Comanche, his voice shaking with emotion. An elderly woman in the crowd gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Other people began whispering urgently to each other, and some of the women started to cry. Rebecca had no idea what was happening or why her appearance had caused such a dramatic reaction. She looked around at the faces surrounding her, trying to understand what it all meant. Everyone seemed to be looking at her like she was some kind of spirit or ghost. A young woman who had been sitting near the elderly woman stood up and walked closer to Rebecca. She studied Rebecca's face carefully, then spoke to Standing Bear in a gentle voice. Whatever she said made him nod slowly, tears now flowing freely down his painted cheeks. The young woman turned to Rebecca and spoke in careful English. "You look like someone very special to us, someone who is no longer with us in this world." "I don't understand," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse from days of fear and little water. Standing Bear wiped the tears from his face and tried to compose himself, but his hands were still shaking. He looked at Rebecca like she was the most precious and fragile thing he had ever seen. "My wife," he said in English, his voice thick with emotion. "You have the face of my wife." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She looked around at the faces surrounding her and began to understand why everyone was staring at her with such amazement. Somehow, in some impossible way, she looked like a woman who had been important to these people, a woman who was no longer alive. Standing Bear slowly got back to his feet, but he moved like a man in a dream. He spoke to his people again in Comanche, and this time Rebecca could hear reverence in his voice, like he was talking about something sacred. An old man who seemed to be some kind of spiritual leader stepped forward and examined Rebecca's face closely. He spoke to Standing Bear in urgent tones, gesturing toward the sky and then toward Rebecca. Whatever he was saying seemed to confirm something important. "The spirits have sent her to us," the young woman translated for Rebecca. "That is what our medicine man believes. He says you are a sign from the world beyond." Rebecca felt dizzy from trying to process everything that was happening. She had expected to be treated as a slave or servant, but instead she was being looked at like some kind of miracle. The change was so sudden and unexpected that she didn't know how to react. Standing Bear knelt down in front of her again, this time more carefully and with great respect. When he spoke to her, his voice was gentle and filled with wonder. "What is your name?" he asked. "Rebecca," she whispered, not sure if she should tell the truth but too scared and confused to lie. "Rebecca," he repeated, like he was memorizing the sound of it. "The spirits have brought you here for a reason. You will be safe with us. You will be honored among our people." As the sun set behind them, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Rebecca realized that her life had just changed in a way she never could have imagined. She was no longer just a captive. She had become something much more mysterious and important. though she still didn't fully understand what that meant. All she knew for certain was that Standing Bear looked at her like she was someone he had lost and found again, and that knowledge both frightened and comforted her in ways she couldn't explain. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the buffalo hide walls of the teepee, where Rebecca had spent her first night in the Comanche camp. She woke up confused for a moment, forgetting where she was. Then the memories came flooding back, and her heart started racing again. The trading post, the sack over her head, and Standing Bear dropping to his knees when he saw her face. A gentle voice spoke from across the teepee. "You are awake." "Good." Rebecca sat up and saw the young woman who had translated for her the night before. She was beautiful, with kind eyes and long black hair braided with colorful beads. Her clothes were made of soft leather decorated with intricate beadwork that must have taken months to complete. "My name is Morning Star," the woman said in careful English. "I am Standing Bear's sister. He has asked me to care for you." Rebecca nodded, not sure what to say. Everything felt so strange and unreal. Yesterday she had been a captive expecting the worst, and now she was being treated like an honored guest. "I don't understand what's happening," Rebecca admitted. "Why does everyone look at me the way they do?" Morning Star's expression grew sad. "You have the face of Little Dove, Standing Bear's wife. She was killed 2 winters ago by soldiers who attacked our camp. Standing Bear loved her more than life itself. When she died, part of him died too." The words made Rebecca's chest feel tight. She had wondered about the woman she resembled, but hearing the story made it real and tragic. Standing Bear wasn't just seeing a physical similarity. He was seeing the face of someone he had lost in the most horrible way. "He thinks I'm her?" Rebecca asked. "No." Morning Star shook her head. "He knows you are not Little Dove, but he believes the spirit sent you to us for a reason. Maybe to help heal his broken heart, or maybe to bring some message from the world beyond. Our people believe such things are possible." Over the following days, Rebecca began to learn about life in the Comanche camp. Morning Star taught her basic words in their language and showed her how things were done. The work was hard but not cruel. The women gathered plants and roots, prepared food, made clothes, and took care of children. Everyone had their place and their responsibilities. What surprised Rebecca most was how kindly she was treated. Instead of being given the hardest jobs like she expected, she was taught skills gently and patiently. When she made mistakes, the women would laugh good-naturedly and show her the right way. Children followed her around curiously, and some of the braver ones even tried to teach her their games. Standing Bear watched her from a distance but rarely spoke to her directly. Sometimes she would catch him staring at her with that same amazed expression from the first night. When their eyes met, he would look away quickly, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. "He is afraid," Morning Star explained one evening, as they sat by the fire working on moccasins. "Afraid to get too close to you because you remind him so much of what he lost, but also afraid to stay away because he believes you are a gift from the spirits. This must be very hard for him," Rebecca said. And she meant it. Despite everything that had happened to her, she could see that Standing Bear was a good man struggling with grief and confusion. "It is," Morning Star agreed. "But it is also the first time since Little Dove died that I have seen hope in his eyes." As weeks passed, Rebecca found herself settling into the rhythm of camp life. She learned to tan hides, to gather the right plants for food and medicine, and to help with the many tasks that kept the community running. Her hands, already tough from farm work, adapted to the new skills. The language came slowly but steadily. The children were her best teachers, giggling when she pronounced words wrong, but repeating them patiently until she got them right. Soon, she could have simple conversations and understand most of what was said around her. One evening, as she was helping prepare the evening meal, a commotion arose at the edge of camp. Riders were approaching fast, and their urgent calls brought everyone running. Rebecca couldn't understand all the words, but she caught enough to know that something bad was happening. Standing Bear emerged from his teepee, already reaching for his weapons. The riders who had arrived were scouts, and they brought news that made everyone's face grow serious. Rebecca heard the word soldiers repeated several times, and her stomach dropped. Morning Star appeared beside her face pale with worry. "Army patrols," she explained quietly. "They are moving through our territory in large numbers, more than we have ever seen before." The camp erupted into organized activity. This wasn't panic, but the swift, practiced response of people who had faced danger many times before. Men gathered weapons and checked their horses. Women began packing essential items and preparing to move the camp if necessary. Standing Bear called together the camp's leaders, and they spoke in urgent, low voices. Rebecca watched from a distance, seeing the weight of leadership on his shoulders. These people depended on him to make the right decisions, to keep them safe in an increasingly dangerous world. Later that night, when the immediate preparations were finished, Standing Bear approached Rebecca for the first time in weeks. He looked tired and older than she remembered. "There may be fighting soon," he said in his careful English. "The army is coming in greater force than before. They mean to drive us from our lands forever." Rebecca nodded, not sure what he expected her to say. "I want you to know," he continued, "that whatever happens, you are under my protection. You are not just a captive here, you are special to us." "Why?" Rebecca asked, the question that had been burning inside her for weeks. Standing Bear was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the stars. "When Little Dove died, I thought the spirits had abandoned me. I could not understand why such a good woman had to suffer, but when I saw your face, I wondered if maybe the spirits were trying to tell me something." "What kind of something?" "Maybe that love doesn't die, even when the person we love is gone. Maybe that there is still beauty and goodness in the world, even when it seems dark. Maybe that I should not give up hope." His words were simple but filled with so much pain and longing that Rebecca felt tears in her eyes. She thought about her own losses, her mother, and the life that had been torn away from her. But she also thought about the kindness she had found in this place she never expected to call home. "I'm not her," Rebecca said softly. "I can never be her." "I know," Standing Bear replied, "and I would not ask you to be, but you have given me something I thought I had lost forever. You have given me a reason to believe that the spirits still care about us." The next morning brought more urgent news. The army was moving faster than expected, and they were heading directly toward the area where the camp was located. The decision was made to move immediately, to find a safer place to wait out whatever was coming. As the camp packed up with swift efficiency, Rebecca realized how much her life had changed. Months ago, she had been a settler's daughter who rarely traveled more than a few miles from home. Now she was part of a nomadic people, learning to live in harmony with the land and seasons. But more than that, she had become important to these people in ways she was still trying to understand. Standing Bear's grief had made her a bridge between his past and his future. Morning Star's friendship had given her a new kind of family. The children's laughter had shown her that joy could exist even in difficult times. As they rode away from the camp toward an uncertain future, Rebecca found herself thinking not about escape or rescue, but about the people around her and the dangers they all faced together. Somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, she had stopped being just a captive and had become part of something larger than herself. A full year had passed since Rebecca first arrived at the Comanche camp, and she could hardly recognize the frightened girl she had once been. Her hands were now skilled at tasks she never could have imagined learning. She could speak the Comanche language almost as well as English, and sometimes she even found herself thinking in their words instead of her own. The winter had been hard, but beautiful. She had learned to find warmth and comfort in the close community of the tribe, sharing stories around fires and helping care for the children during the long, cold months. Standing Bear had begun to speak with her more often, their conversations growing from awkward exchanges to something approaching friendship. But spring brought news that changed everything. A messenger arrived at dawn, riding hard and looking exhausted. He brought word that the army was planning a prisoner exchange. After months of fighting and raids on both sides, military leaders and tribal chiefs had agreed to meet and trade captives for peace. The news spread through the camp like wildfire. Some people seemed relieved that there might be an end to the constant threat of attack. Others looked worried, knowing that any agreement with the army rarely lasted long, and some, Rebecca noticed, looked at her with sadness in their eyes. Standing. Bear called a council meeting that evening. All the important people in the tribe gathered around the central fire to discuss what this meant for everyone. Rebecca sat with Morningstar, understanding most of what was said, but feeling like her world was spinning out of control. "You will have to choose," Morningstar whispered to her during a quiet moment in the discussion. "The army will expect all white captives to be returned, but you are no longer just a captive here. You are family." The word hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Family. Over the past year, that's exactly what these people had become to her. Morningstar was like the sister she never had. The children who had taught her their language and games felt like her own nieces and nephews. And Standing Bear. He had become something she couldn't quite name, but something important. After the council meeting ended, Standing Bear approached her. His face looked troubled, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. "Walk with me," he said simply. They walked to the edge of the camp, where they could see the stars clearly in the dark sky. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Standing Bear broke the silence. "Tomorrow we ride to the meeting place," he said. "The army expects you to be returned to your people." Rebecca felt her heart sink, though she wasn't sure why. A year ago, she would have done anything to get back to the white world. Now the thought filled her with dread. "What if I don't want to go back?" she asked quietly. Standing Bear looked at her with surprise. "You do not wish to return to your own people?" "These are my people now," Rebecca said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "I don't know if I remember how to be the person I was before." It was true. The girl who had worked in her family's garden felt like someone from a dream. Rebecca had learned to see the world through different eyes, to value different things, to find meaning in a way of life she never could have imagined. "Your family," Standing Bear said gently. "Do you not miss them?" "My parents are dead," Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite the pain the words caused. "My brother, I don't even know if they're still alive. But here I have Morningstar. I have the children. I have—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. "You have what?" Standing Bear asked, moving closer to her. "I have you," she whispered, finally admitting something she had been trying not to think about for months. Standing Bear was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "When I first saw your face, I thought the spirits were mocking me, showing me what I had lost, reminding me of my pain. But as I have watched you this year, I have learned something different." "What?" "You are not Little Dove returned to me. You are someone new, someone the spirits brought to teach me that my heart could feel joy again, that I could care for someone without betraying the memory of my wife." Rebecca felt tears running down her cheeks. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that if you choose to stay with us, you will not be staying as a captive or even as an adopted member of the tribe. You will be staying as someone I love." The words hung in the air between them, changing everything. Rebecca had known her feelings for Standing Bear were growing stronger, but she had tried to convince herself it was just gratitude or the strange bond created by her resemblance to his wife. Now she realized it was much more than that. "But what about the exchange?" she asked. "That is your choice to make," Standing Bear said. "I will not ask you to give up your chance to return to your people for me. You must decide what your heart tells you is right." The next day dawned clear and bright. The tribe broke camp early and began the journey to the meeting place, a valley that had been chosen because it was neutral ground. Rebecca rode in silence, her mind spinning with thoughts and fears about what lay ahead. When they arrived at the valley, she could see that both sides had come in force. The army had set up a formal camp with rows of tents and soldiers in neat uniforms. The various tribes had gathered on the opposite side, a colorful mix of different peoples united by their shared struggle against the advancing settlers. In the center of the valley, a small group of leaders from both sides had gathered under a white flag. Rebecca could see army officers with their shiny buttons and formal bearing talking with tribal chiefs in their traditional regalia. Are you ready? Morningstar asked, riding up beside her. Rebecca looked around at the faces of the people who had become her family. She saw worry and sadness in their eyes, but also understanding. They knew what a difficult choice she faced. The exchange began with formal speeches and ceremonies. One by one, captives from both sides were brought forward. Rebecca watched as white settlers were reunited with soldiers who had come to collect them. Some looked happy to be returning to their old lives. Others seemed confused and scared, like they no longer knew where they belonged. When it was Rebecca's turn, Standing Bear himself escorted her to the center of the valley. The army officer, in charge, a stern-faced man with gray hair, looked at her with expectation. "Miss McKenna, I presume," he said. "Your brothers have been searching for you. They'll be mighty glad to know you're safe." Rebecca's heart jumped. Her brothers were alive. They had been looking for her. For a moment, she felt a pull toward the life she had lost, toward the family that remembered her. But then she looked back at Standing Bear, at Morningstar, at the children who had taught her their games. She thought about the life she had built here, the person she had become, the love she had found in the most unexpected place. She started to speak, then stopped. The army officer looked impatient. "Come along, miss. We need to complete this exchange and get moving." Rebecca took a step toward the army camp, then stopped again. Standing Bear watched her with pain in his eyes, but he said nothing. He had told her the choice was hers, and he was keeping his word. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said to the officer, "but I'm not going back." The words caused a commotion on both sides. The army officer looked confused and angry, while some of the tribal leaders nodded with approval. "Miss, you can't possibly mean that," the officer said. "These are savages. You belong with civilized people." Rebecca looked at the man who called her people savages, then back at Standing Bear, who had shown her more kindness and respect than many civilized men ever had. "I belong where I choose to belong," she said firmly, "and I choose to stay." She turned and walked back toward Standing Bear, each step feeling like a small victory. When she reached him, he smiled for the first time since the exchange had begun. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Rebecca replied. As the formal exchange continued around them, Standing Bear took a small leather pouch from around his neck. It was decorated with beautiful beadwork and seemed very old and precious. "This was Little Dove's medicine bag," he said, placing it gently in Rebecca's hands. "She would want you to have it, I think, not because you are replacing her, but because you are beginning your own story here." Rebecca held the small bag carefully, feeling the weight of its significance. It wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of acceptance, of belonging, of a future she had chosen for herself. As the sun set over the valley, marking the end of the exchange ceremony, Rebecca knew that her old life was truly over. But her new life, the one she had built with courage and love among people who had become her family, was just beginning. Standing Bear took her hand as they walked back toward their people, and Rebecca felt a peace she had never known before. She had found her place in the world, and it was exactly where she chose it to be.